chaos and game theory in college football. All right, you're going to have to forgive me. This is going to be largely seen through the prism of a homer, but it's also going to be a little bit messy because we are headed into potentially massive chaos, massive debate, and massive game theory in college football. Just 1 week in the college football regular season remains, and after that, you have conference championship games, and we can already see some form taking shape. The AP poll of 25 teams is out, and it looks something like this right now. Georgia, number 1. Ohio State, number 2. Michigan, number 3. Washington, number 4. Florida State, 5. Oregon, 6. Texas, 7. Alabama, 8. The college football playoff poll will come out later this week. But the 1 week remaining left in the regular season is rivalry week. We have some pretty good games this week, and here's a sampling. You got Oregon State. Oregon is a one-loss team still in contention for the college football playoff. You have Texas Tech. Texas needs to win the Big 12 to remain in the debate for the college football playoff. You've got Alabama Auburn, Washington State, Florida State Florida, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina. I mention that because the nephew's been starting now for about 3 or 4 games at Clemson at right guard, number 55 in your program, number 1 in your heart, and he's doing very well. I say that through completely objective eyes. He's doing very, very well, starting as a freshman, as an offensive lineman at Clemson, who's on a huge winning streak and can finish out the season against South Carolina here to go 8-4. And you have the big game of the weekend. As we head into this holiday week, Thanksgiving weekend, you have the big game, Ohio State versus Michigan. Now, I've begun to think about this. How does this all shake out? I just gave you the top 8 teams. Well, Ohio State and Michigan are going to play each other. You're going to end up with a 1-loss, non-conference championship game team in the Big Ten. The loser of Ohio State-Michigan won't make the Big Ten championship game, who will go on, I believe, to play Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. Here's my first contention. The loser of the game this weekend, Ohio State and Michigan, is out of the college football playoff. It doesn't matter how good their season has been. They drop to 1 loss. They don't make their conference championship game. I don't see the argument they will have against any other 1-loss team. We can do the thing that the committee is supposed to do and say who is the better team, but resume has to matter. And everyone else's resume is also going to have a lot of merit. And I don't think a loser, a 1-loss team who doesn't make their conference championship game in the Big Ten remains in the debate. So give 1 playoff spot to the Big Ten. There's always the scenario of, let's say Ohio State beats Michigan and Ohio State goes to the Big Ten championship game and then loses to Iowa. Now you've got 2 1-loss Big Ten teams, but I still think in that scenario, 1-loss Ohio State, loser of the Big Ten championship game, beating Michigan, who never makes a championship game, goes in ahead of Michigan. So the point I'm getting at is, at most, 1 Big Ten team makes the college football playoff. And then you have the SEC. Now, assuming that Georgia and Alabama survive rivalry weekend, Georgia beats Georgia Tech and Alabama beats Auburn, you have a scenario where I believe the winner of the SEC championship game, Alabama or Georgia, goes to the college football playoff. But similar to the Big Ten, not the loser. Of course, if Alabama loses, sending them to 2 losses on the season, they're out. But let's say Alabama beats Georgia. What do you do with a 1-loss Georgia team? Here's a debate specifically. What about 1-loss Georgia against 1-loss Big 12 champion Texas? Who do you take? In that scenario, Georgia's probably lost to Alabama. Texas beat Alabama. No matter how much we think of Georgia, can you make an argument for a team that didn't win their conference championship, same number of losses, lost to a team the other team beat to go into the college football playoff? I don't think that you can make that argument. I know I have burnt orange colored glasses, but I think it probably same thing applies to this scenario. Can you take one-loss Georgia over Pac-12 champion, one-loss Oregon. I don't think that you can. In this scenario, Oregon beats Oregon State in rivalry weekend and also goes on to beat Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. Can you take Georgia over Oregon? I don't think that you can. Florida State, if they win out, gets one of the other spots. If Florida State loses, and they just lost their starting quarterback to a horrific leg injury, if Florida State loses, they are out. One-loss Florida State doesn't remain in the debate. The ACC is too weak. But undefeated Florida State, in. Undefeated Washington, in. That takes us to the Pac-12. If Oregon beats Washington, sending Washington to one loss, they're out. But Oregon's in. And you may end up with a debate in that scenario where it's Florida State, Georgia or Alabama, Ohio State or Michigan, and a debate between Big 12 champion Texas and Pac-12 champion Oregon. Who goes in that scenario? Right now, Oregon is ranked ahead of Texas. We're headed for chaos. So I need to get my scenarios and my debate, which I think I've narrowed that debate down. I think it is one-loss Georgia against a Pac-12 or Big 12 champion, and I can leave that to you, willcainpodcast@fox.com. Or a direct debate between, for one spot, Pac-12 champion against Big 12 champion. That specifically would be Oregon against Texas. Because if Washington wins out, they're in. I told you it would get confusing, but we're really 2 games out. The game theory is not that hard. The game theory is not that hard. One spot for the SEC, one spot for the Big Ten. And then either a spot for the Pac-12 and the Big 12, or you let Georgia have one of those, or Florida State takes one of those. And then you have a Georgia debate against one of those Pac-12 or Big 12 champions. All I know is this: when I boil it all down, I need the following to occur. I don't care what happens in the SEC. I don't care what happens in the Big Ten. They both get one team in. I need Florida State to lose. The producer of this podcast, Patrick Hatton, is a big Florida State fan. Sorry, Patrick. I need Florida State to lose. I need a spot vacated. That's the only way I can see one pure spot vacated. If Oregon beats Washington, Oregon takes Washington's spot in the top 4. That's what happens with Alabama and Georgia. That's what happens with Ohio State and Michigan. They take the previous person's spot. So the only way to truly vacate a spot is for Florida State to lose. I need that to happen. And then, just to keep Georgia out of the debate, I don't want people sitting there going, Georgia or Texas, because I know a lot of people are like, Georgia's the better team. I'm going to have to go ahead and root for Georgia to win out. I don't care what happens in the Big Ten. And that's how I get Texas into the college football playoff. It's going to be a fun rivalry weekend here on Thanksgiving weekend, and that will be the big game, Ohio State versus Michigan. Then we come back together before championship weekend, begin the debate, and then we go bananas debating each other about who gets the 4 spots. Luckily, next year, we go to a 12-team playoff.